Good day, everyone. I'd like to welcome you back to Contemplating Catholicism. Today, I'd like to address two heresies that affect the church. Two heresies that many people struggle with. One is an overemphasis on free will, and the other is an overemphasis on grace. And how these two heresies play out, I'd like to explain a little bit more and how they apply to us today. The two heresies, like I said before, are these heresies that concern the free will and the grace of God. And one of these is brought to bear, the extreme is brought to bear under Jansenism or Calvinism. They're very similar to one another. Jansenism was a heresy within the church, and Calvinism became a schismatic element outside the church, influencing a lot of theology today in the Protestant world. And the other aspect is Pelagianism. Pelagianism is the thinking that through our own efforts, through the free will, we can attain salvation on our own. Both is an overemphasis on the grace of God, and there's no need for free will. The other is an overemphasis on the free will, and there's no need for God's grace. And so many heresies are like that within the church. In the early church, you dealt with an overemphasis on the deity of Jesus Christ and minimizing his humanity, or the other way, or how the two are brought together. And much of the heresies of the early church were Christological. They dealt with the nature of Jesus Christ. But this whole aspect of salvation as it concerns Calvinism or Jansenism and the free will are also very important. They have a direct impact today on your thinking and my thinking. How much does the free will play in our salvation? How much does the grace of God pertain to our salvation? For instance, we can go to the book of Sirach, which affirms for us very clearly the importance of free will. In Sirach chapter 15 and verse 14, we read these words concerning the free will. God in the beginning created human beings and made them subject to their own free choice. Pretty clear statement concerning the free will. If you choose, you can keep the commandments. Loyalty is doing the will of God. Set before you are fire and water. To whatever you choose, stretch out your hand. Before everyone are life and death. Whatever they choose will be given to them. Speaking of the importance of the free will when it comes to the choices we make and to our eternal destiny. It's before us, free will. But the other aspect of that, of course, is the grace of God. We need the grace of God when it comes to our salvation. But what happens if the grace of God is overemphasized and the free will is minimized or eradicated altogether, is what we find in Calvinism or Jansenism. We know about Calvin and his disposition. But within the church, there was a heresy known as Jansenism. Cornelius Jansen was born in 1585. This was in what's now the Netherlands. He became a priest, and then he became a teacher. He was a professor of exegesis at the University of Louvain. And this was back in 1617. Brilliant professor, a writer. Many people subscribed to his teaching, but it was basically Calvinistic. The tulip, the total depravity, the unconditional election, the limited atonement, and the irresistible grace and the perseverance of the saints. That's what he taught. And the important thing to realize in teaching that doctrine, what's minimized or perhaps even eradicated altogether is the free will. The free will, and Jansenism denies the necessity of free will in utilizing grace. God's going to give it to you. Your free will it doesn't matter. He claims, or Jansenism, it proclaims that grace is so efficacious that the will isn't involved in any way. It doesn't even have to assent to it. And this grace, of course, as Calvin taught, is limited to the predestined, to the elect. And God, he gives it to some, but he doesn't give it to everyone. And this heresy, Jansenism, as it began to take hold in the church, outside the church, it continued to flourish. But inside the church, it was condemned by two different popes. It was condemned by Innocent X, and then by Clement XI in 1713. Because there was a writer who wrote more extensively and had 101 different points concerning the importance of this doctrine, and he was deemed as heretical. This was a Father Quesnel. But what's minimized again is the free will. It's looked at as completely irrelevant to our salvation. What's emphasized is the grace of God. This is something that the Catholic Church condemned. It had to condemn it because we believe in the importance of free will. Like much of theology, where people want to make it either grace or free will, we say it's both and. You need both of them. We can't save ourselves. We need God's grace, but also our will is involved. But traditional Calvinism doesn't believe in the importance of free will. The whole aspect of total depravity is that there's nothing you can do in and of yourself to aid in salvation or move you towards salvation in any way. You're totally depraved. As the 1689 London Baptist Confession said, humanity, by falling into a state of sin, has completely lost all ability to choose any spiritual good. You can't choose anything that's good spiritually. You're in this state that's absolutely opposed to anything concerning God. Well, the big problem you find with this doctrine is it denies something that Scripture affirms, and that is free will, that the consensus of the fathers affirm the importance of the free will, that the church leadership under our popes recognized as important, that is free will. You cannot deny free will. This definition of total depravity is totally depraved. We as Catholics, we believe in what's called concupiscence. We believe in original sin that we inherit from Adam and Eve. As Calvinists and Jansenists would also say, we inherited that sin nature, but they say it's totally depraved, and we say no, it's concupiscence. And what that means is we're born with this tendency, this propensity to want to fulfill our own desires, to live in pride, and it's summarized by First John, the lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh and the boastful pride of life. That tendency is what we're born with. But it doesn't mean that we cannot do anything spiritually good. That certainly is contrary to Jewish theology also. Jewish theology believes in a Yetzer, an evil Yetzer that people have in this world, but there's also the ability to make good choices. We believe in concupiscence, and because of that, we need the grace of God. But this whole idea of total depravity is not part of Catholicism. It's something that's condemned as a heresy. But there's another extreme. And as we're in the midst of Lent, we may have this tendency to go to one extreme or another. There's something very appealing in this whole area of Jansenism, that it's totally up to God. I don't have to be involved. There's nothing in myself that I can do. My righteousness is completely in Christ. There's nothing that I can do to enhance my salvation in any way. It's very appealing because what's emphasized is God's power, God's sovereignty, but we also have this whole idea of accountability to God for our actions. And we're judged at the end of time, a judgment that is based on the decisions that we made throughout this life. We're accountable for the free will, what we do with our lives. And if that is true, then free will must be important. The works that we do must be important. What we produce in our lives must be important. You cannot deny free will, as Calvinism and Jansenism does. But there's another extreme. That extreme is known as Pelagianism. And this heresy goes way back, and there's also different aspects of it that came into bear later on in the 15th century and 16th century. But Pelagianism goes back to a lay monk, back to the year he was born in 355. His name was Pelagius. And Pelagius, again, he became a monk, and he taught that all you need is your free will. You really don't need the grace of God, because Adam's sin, when he sinned, didn't really affect the rest of the human race. It only affected Adam. Adam fell, Eve fell, but their particular fall didn't affect us as human beings. And we are free to choose. In and of ourselves, in our wills, we can choose to do good and please God. We don't need there's no such thing as depravity, whether you define it as concupiscence or total depravity. He totally denied that. And children, they're born with this capacity. They're totally innocent. They were like Adam and Eve before the fall. They're innocent. People are born that way. And people in the Old Testament had an equal opportunity to gain heaven by keeping the law. In the New Testament, we keep the law. We can keep the mandates of the gospel. And we all get to heaven through our own free will. Pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. There really is this tendency both ways in Catholicism that one way or the other, whether it's Jansenism or Pelagianism. It's totally my self-efforts, or if it's totally God, there's this tendency to be drawn one way or the other. But it's important to come back to the fact that it's not either or, it's both and. None of us can be saved apart from the grace of God. Catholic teaching. Catholics believe in grace, the necessity of grace. We believe what Augustine taught us concerning grace, that we need God's grace. We believe in different aspects of his grace. Grace to move us toward salvation. Grace that's given to us in baptism, where God gives us faith, hope, and love. Where grace that God gives us in the sacraments. Moving toward the Lord, aided by his grace. But it doesn't deny free will. Free will, we can decide that we want to chuck it all, and God will hold us accountable to that. Somebody can decide, well, I don't want anything to do with this. In fact, we see that happen all the time. You can believe in perseverance of the saints and minimize free will, but free will is always there. You have choices every day that you make. Free will is important. Of course, we realize in and of ourselves, we need the grace of God to please him. We need our wills to be empowered. We need God's help to make the right choices. But it's not either or, it's both and. There was a resurrection of Pelagianism in the middle centuries. And this happened in some of the monasteries, particularly in France, where what was emphasized is the importance of keeping a rigid schedule, the importance of having great self-discipline in order to please God. And this Pelagian tendency began to take over again, and people were very austere with everything, hard on themselves, and some people it led to actually flagration, where they injured themselves in order to try to bring the will under control. Through my self efforts, I'm going to please God. And many people go into Lent with that same kind of thinking. Well, I'm going to please God because I don't eat chocolate, and because I go to confession more, or because I'm denying these things. I'm going to bring my will into subjection, and because of that, I'm going to please God. Now, that doesn't minimize those things. Our will needs to be in subjection. Those are some good things that God gives us by his grace. But if you think you're going to live a life by subjecting your will and through some kind of regiment where your will is under subjection, it's going to find a way to get out. You need God's grace in everything that you do. One of the saints that realized this was a saint by the name of Louise de Marillac. She was a saint, lived from 1591 to 1660. And she came from a background where she was used to doing some manual things. And St. Vincent de Paul recruited her to help him in Paris. He had the help of some other women, but some of them were from aristocratic kind of background, and they weren't able to do what he was envisioning with the poor in Paris at this time. But Louise was one who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. And she had a very kind of practical Christianity, and she was a real go-getter. And uh, Francis de Paul or Vincent de Paul did uh, relied on her a lot. They actually became partners in ministry, and Louise, she wanted to bring other women and train them in this ministry in Paris and other parts of France at this time. So she brought 4 women into this convent that basically she was starting. And a quarter of a century later, after this, there was 40 convents in Europe that she started. But she was one that recognized the importance of discipline, but also she recognized the importance of the grace of God. And you can't separate these two. She dealt with what was at that time a kind of a semi-Pelagianism, where people were thinking, I'm spiritual because of my own self efforts. And she was writing to another person who was struggling with some of this, and she wrote a letter addressing it. And this is what Louise de Marillac said in one of her letters. I beg God to help you to forget yourself and to mortify your desire for self-satisfaction which is in you. And it hides under this beautiful appearance of striving for a great perfection. We are greatly deceiving ourselves, she said, if we think that we are capable of it. And even more if we believe that we can attain this perfection by our own efforts and by constantly and closely watching over all the movements and disposition of our souls. What she was trying to address here was the scrupulosity that this particular uh, religious person was dealing with, being over scrupulous about every little thing. And she goes on to say, it's a good thing once a year to apply ourselves seriously to this kind of examination, probably speaking of this time of Lent, but while being duly distrustful of ourselves and recognizing our weaknesses. She realized you need the grace of God. But to put ourselves through a continual purgatory and to analyze our souls and give an account of all our thoughts in useless, even dangerous, I am appealing to you what I was told long ago, that it's useless and dangerous if that's your preoccupation all the time. Because we need the grace of God continually. She went on to say, I beg you, my dear sister, to help me by your prayers, and I will help you by mine, so that we may obtain from God the grace to walk simply and confidently along the path of his holy love without too much introspection. Good advice. I think it's really this bringing together. Of course, our will is involved in our salvation, but it's bringing it together with the grace and the mercy of God. Someone made a comment in reference to her. Strict, self-propelled Christianity was popular in the 17th century France, and today many still take that human willpower approach. But St. Louise's spirituality was more divine and thus more realistic. Stop fussing. Don't try too hard. Let God love you. Rest in his grace. Sounds to me like the teaching of Christ, who promised that his yoke was easy and his burden is light. Isn't that what Jesus invited us to do in the gospel? Sometimes we get the impression this Christian life thing is just so overwhelming. It's something that I can't do. And you're right, you can't. That's why Jesus invites us to take his yoke. And we think, well, his yoke is so heavy, I can't bear it. That's not how he describes it. Jesus said, come to me, all who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, many believe that yoke is overwhelming, that we can't bear it. But he says it's easy and light. And why is that? Because it's a double yoke on both ends of it. It's Christ that helps us in this yoke. We bear a yoke, but it's with his grace and mercy. Willpower is important, but the grace of God needs to permeate everything that we do. Augustine, the great saint, realized it too. He needed God's grace at all times. This Lent, are you trying to do it all on your own? Or are you also relying on the grace of God? These heresies, the heresy of Jansenism, thinking that it's entirely up to God, I don't have to do anything, a heresy. Or this whole area of Pelagianism, it's entirely up to me, I got to do everything. Both of them are heretical. We need to bring the two together in good, sound Catholic theology. Thank you very much. I hope you continue to have a great Lent. God bless you.